Okay, the 49% line. The recession model that has never been wrong. Okay, let's have a look at this.
Model. It runs quietly in the background while market.
I have no sound.
There is a model. It runs quietly in the background while markets talk about soft landings, while politicians talk about resilience, while households keep making payments on the assumption that next quarter will look enough like the last one to stay alive. The model does not care about narratives. It reads labor data, consumer spending, manufacturing orders, credit conditions, financial stress, energy prices. It takes the noise of the economy and compresses it into one number, one probability, one line on a scale that says whether the United States is heading toward recession in the next 12 months. It is maintained by Moody's Analytics, and it has one property that
Is this going to be GDP growth? Guessing?
makes it dangerous. Every single time that number has crossed 50%, a recession followed. Not most of the time, not usually, every time.
Is that
Across 11
GDP growth? That number is nowhere near 50%.
American recessions since the Second World War. 80 years of history, zero misses. In February 2026, the model reached 49%, 1 point below the line that has
I mean, what is this
never
number?
been wrong. And that reading was taken before the latest deterioration fully entered the machine, before the newest energy shock moved through the full data cycle, before the March consumer panic was properly absorbed, before the next employment print.
I mean, like, I think Canada's been in a technical recession for a while. GDP per capita chart. Okay, what am I looking for? GDP growth per capita chart. Gross domestic product per capita returns to trend scenario. Yeah, I think this is really old though. Like that's 20 stops at like 2023. Do we have one that goes further? 10 years. Maybe this one will work. Let's try AI. I'm not finding the data I'm looking for. For the last 4 years, can you break down the GDP growth per capita in Canada by quarter? We're not going to get to see our nice little chart, but this should get us what we're looking for. Put it on thinking mode. Keep going.
Before the oil spike began bleeding into confidence, freight, food, and spending at the same time. The number is already at 49. The inputs are getting worse. And if you are a household in Brampton, Calgary, Windsor, or Halifax, that number is not an American curiosity. It is a countdown attached to your mortgage renewal, your job security, your grocery bill, and the next policy decision from a Bank of Canada that is already trapped between inflation from outside and weakness from inside. In the Hormuz trap, we showed you why Canada cannot survive the next oil shock. In the stagflation trap, we showed you why central banks cannot rescue you from it. This video is the missing third layer. This is the model that is about to call the timing. The line is at...
Okay, I'm gonna wait to hear what the actual number is about after. Oh, it is really thinking. Okay.
At 49, the next print absorbs the damage, and the model has never been wrong. This is the 49% line. The power of the number comes from what it is not. It is not a headline. It is not a pundit's mood. It is not a television panel guessing whether the vibes feel recessionary. It is a pattern recognition system built to identify the combinations of weakness that have preceded every modern American downturn. It takes a wide spread of leading indicators and asks one question: does the current structure of the economy resemble
A wide spread of leading indicators. No idea what those are.
the structure that existed before prior recessions? When the answer is no, the number stays low. When the answer starts drifting toward yes, the number rises. And when it crosses 50, the historical record says the recession clock has already started. That matters because ordinary
I think we might be inside the recession clock. Quarterly real GDP per capita growth percentage. Q over Q. So what's the rule? Like 2 quarters in the negative, the technical recession, or is it 2 years in the? Okay, so nothing, 0.5, negative 0.3, plus 0.3, plus 0.1, minus 0.1, not explicitly published. Okay, 2023, we were in a recession. We had one positive 0.1 that broke it up in 2022 and 2023. This persistent weakness in per capita growth has been a key driver of the feel bad economy. Higher housing costs, mortgage renewal pressures, and stagflation risks. Strong population growth masks underlying softness until 2025, when slower immigration helped per capita numbers stabilize. Even as the Strait of Hormuz oil shock and Carney era deficit landed new inflationary pressures. Levels, okay, what is the criteria for a technical recession? Like, in my opinion, this looks very recessionary. We don't have the numbers. Actually, I guess this goes right up to 2025, the end of 2025. We did have Q3. I mean, that looks good, but everything else, 0.3 isn't. Let's see, what's the a technical recession is the common rule of thumb definition used by economists, media, and analysts worldwide. 2 consecutive quarters of negative real GDP growth. So real GDP in our Canadian economy has been masked by immigration. Strong population growth masks underlying softness. So if we look at the GDP per capita and we apply that to the 2 consecutive quarters, then we were in a recession here. We were in a recession here. We briefly left the recession. These ones aren't even, we have no idea that that recession continued throughout that whole period or not. And a couple, I mean, I wouldn't even call those strong quarters. It's not negative. And a negative and a positive and right at zero. Like, we've been in and out of a recession, technically. We look at the real GDP per capita, like the past 5 years in Canada. This is the past 3 years. I kind of want to go further back to see what. Let's get back to it.
economic commentary
Hear what the actual indicator is.
usually fails in the same way? It gets trapped arguing about one data point at a time. One jobs report, one inflation print, one GDP revision, one oil spike, one market sell-off. That is how people miss the whole picture. They wait for certainty in one indicator while the system is already weakening across 6 others. The model does not make that mistake. It is designed to read deterioration as a cluster. Weak labor, weak confidence, weak output, tightening credit, energy stress, asset repricing. One by one, none of those conditions has to mean recession. Together, they create the fingerprint. That is why the line matters. Not because machine learning is magic, because pattern recognition is exactly what recessions hide behind until they are too obvious to deny. And this is where the channel logic gets strong.
Like, they don't tell you you're in a recession when you're in a recession. It's something that history remembers later on. They try to mask it when you're in a recession because they don't want people freaking out.
The Hormuz trap gave you the physical shock. The stagflation trap gave you the policy paralysis. This file gives you the signal that tells you when the macro damage is becoming too large to contain with narrative management. The model is not predicting the trigger. The trigger is already visible. The model is measuring whether the body can survive it. The answer is getting closer to no. The model does not predict the panic. It measures the fragility. Tell me in the comments.
What is the model?
Do you trust a model with an 80-year record, or do you think this cycle is somehow the first exception?
The inputs. Okay.
The line did not rise to 49 because of one bad month. It got there because almost every important input has started moving in the wrong direction at the same time. Start with labor. The United States lost 92,000 jobs in February. Outside the narrow areas still absorbing workers, the labor...
I mean, Canada's losing jobs like crazy too. I think a lot of this was the low interest rates into COVID caused the spike in employment because money was cheap. That's the rebound that we see in the economy. And now there is like now there the jobs that they didn't need, they have hired, there's a correction. So we're losing the jobs, turn to a more stable economy. Only after we lose these jobs are we going to see the damage that was truly done by COVID. And I think it's going to be significant. I think the cheap, low interest rates, cheap money hid the damage. And now that the damage is going to be shown, companies no longer is their cheap money have to correct their workforce. It's brutal. From what I understand, nowhere's hiring right now. It's incredibly tough to get a job. We can't do the same thing we did where we super lower interest rate because of the inflation spike that causes. I don't know.
The market has been losing momentum for months. This is how downturns usually begin, not with one spectacular collapse. With quiet exhaustion, less hiring, fewer openings, more caution, payrolls that stop expanding fast enough to absorb new weakness.
I've heard that hiring is down across Canada and the US. What can you tell me about this? We got thinking mode on, so let's
Then
continue.
comes confidence, less hiring, fewer openings, more caution, payrolls that stop expanding fast enough to absorb new weakness. Then comes confidence. Consumer sentiment is not a luxury statistic. It is the emotional balance sheet of the household sector. When that index collapses, it tells you something vital. People do not just feel pessimistic. They start changing behavior. They delay purchases. They hold cash. They cancel plans.
You want your consumers to continue consuming because consumers losing confidence is what can start a downward spiral in an economy.
Stop assuming the future will be easier than the present. That mood change feeds directly into spending, and spending is the engine under the American economy. Then comes output. GDP growth slowed sharply. not to collapse levels, but to the kind of level that matters in the late stage of a cycle, weak enough that any external shock hits harder, weak enough that the economy enters the next stress event with no cushion, weak enough that a supply shock is no longer striking a healthy body. It is striking one that was already tired. Then comes oil.
Mhm. Okay, let's. Oh my gosh, talked a lot. Yes, hiring has slowed noticeably in both Canada and the US over the past year. Recent data showing outright weakness in early 2026. This fits the broader picture of soft economic momentum, trade tensions, US tariffs, slower population growth in Canada, which our population growth was mainly immigration, which we are cutting back. Global uncertainty, including the Strait of Hormuz. That's making employers cautious. Canada's net losses and a static labor market. Statistic Canada's labor force survey shows the labor market has stalled. February 2026, employment fell by, oh, we heard about this, 84,000 jobs, minus 0.4%. So 1 month, we lost 0.4% of jobs. The largest monthly drop outside the pandemic since early 2022. This followed a 25,000 job decline in January. Full-time jobs were hit hardest. Year over year, employment is essentially flat. Almost no job growth over the last 12 months. Unemployment rose to 6.7% in February, up from 6.5% in January. Hiring activity, the Canadian Hiring Index tracking online job posting, fell for the fourth straight month in February. Job vacancies have been trending lower overall. Sectors, losses concentrated in wholesale/retail trade, construction, manufacturing, information/culture/recreation, and other services. Some offset in transportation/warehousing, public administration. Not enough to reverse the trend. Broader context, economists describe the market as static after a year of US tariffs and a sharp slowdown in population growth, which had previously masked weakness. TD Economics expects the labor market to tread water 2026. Wage growth has also eased. In Alberta specifically, picture is mixed. Energy sector hiring could see some lift from higher global oil prices tied to the Hormuz disruption, and Canada's push for more oil investment under Carney. National trade and manufacturing softness still weigh on overall hiring. Okay, United States hiring at post-pandemic lows. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, JOLTS, reports February 2026 data released March 31st, firms cooling demand. Job openings, little change at 6.9 million. Hires dropped sharply to 4.85 million, the lowest level since March 2020. The hire rates fell to 3.1%, also the lowest since April 2020. Layoffs remain low, ticked up slightly. Trend, employers are posting fewer new openings, actually filling far fewer positions, reflecting caution amid trade uncertainty, slower growth. So they think the trade uncertainty has a lot to do with why this is happening. Supply shocks plus weak demand. The Hormuz oil disruptions are adding inflationary pressures, while overall growth remains soft. Trade and policy, you have tariffs have hit export sensitive sectors in Canada. Both countries face uncertainty. Literally, Trump's tariffs are are messing with both countries, causing uncertainty, that's lowering hiring, causing a lot of issues. People can't get jobs and they can't afford to live. Structural shifts. Canada's slower immigration / population growth reduces labor supply and hiring needs. In both countries, years of oil underinvestment globally contribute to energy volatility, which complicates business. Stagflation echo, higher inflation risk from oil make aggressive rate hikes less likely. The weak hiring adds to family budget stress via slower wage gains and job insecurity, especially at mortgage renewal time in Canada. This isn't a full-blown collapse. Unemployment is still moderate, and some sectors like healthcare, defense, and energy are holding up or growing. But it's clearly a cooling market, making households feel the pinch. All right, let's figure out what this 49 represents.
This is the decisive layer, because higher energy prices do not stay inside the energy sector. They move into trucking, shipping, fertilizer, plastics, food, utilities, airline routes,
Higher energy prices, you will see that everywhere.
insurance costs, and the psychology of every household that has to fill a tank before they can even think about discretionary spending. That is what makes this moment different from a clean recession call. This is not just a domestic slowdown. It is a domestic slowdown meeting an external price shock. That is the kind of combination that turns weakness into a hemorrhage. And the line at 49 was reached before the full March damage entered the data stream. That is the part people are underestimating. The model is already sitting 1 point below the threshold, while still reading a world that was less damaged than the one we are standing in now. In other words, the 49 is already stale, and stale in the wrong direction. The model is reading yesterday's weakness, while tomorrow's shock is already here. Without the history, 49 is just a dramatic number. With the history, it becomes a warning label. Because the point is not that the model exists. The point is that it has been here before. The last time it reached this kind of level outside a live recession was 2007. Before that, it rose ahead of 2001. Before that, ahead of 1990. Before that, ahead of the early 1980s. Before that, ahead of the oil shock recession in the 1970s. The pattern repeats because recessions do not arrive as surprises to the data. They arrive as surprises to the people who refuse to read the data honestly. That distinction matters. A recession usually feels sudden only to the public. To the ledger, it has been forming for months. Labor weakens first at the margin. Confidence slips next. Growth slows. Markets start repricing. Credit conditions harden. And then one visible shock, an oil spike, a financial failure, a policy error, a war, a demand collapse, takes a body that was already fragile and pushes it over the line. That is why the historical record is so useful. It strips away the fantasy that every downturn is a random event. It is not random. It is cumulative. And this is where the model becomes much more than a US signal, because Canada almost never gets to remain untouched by American recession dynamics.
I mean, what was it? 70% of our trade goes to the US. Our economies are very closely tied. I think that's decreased recently with Trump's tariffs, but like still, the economies and under Kuzma, the amount of integration there is massive. So if you're measuring the US economy, you can usually use that to predict the Canadian economy.
The United States is not just another economy beside Canada. It is the dominant buyer, the dominant financial gravity, the dominant demand partner, and the dominant source of transmitted weakness when things start failing south of the border. So when the American data cluster begins to resemble prior recession clusters, Canadians should not read that as foreign news. They should read it as incoming weather. That is exactly what we opened in the 51st state trap. And the passenger seat. Canada likes to describe itself as sovereign in rhetoric while living as a passenger in macro reality. When the driver swerves, the passenger still hits the windshield. That is the historical lesson. The model does not tell you the exact day. It tells you the weather system is already forming. Recessions do not come from nowhere. They come from ignored deterioration. Quick poll in the comments. What matters more right now? The oil shock or the labor slowdown? Now bring it home. If the line crosses 50 and the record holds, the United States enters recession within the next year. That is not an optional event for Canada. The export link is obvious. The capital link is obvious. The currency link is obvious. When American demand weakens, Canadian output follows. When U.S. firms cut orders, Canadian suppliers lose volume. When U.S. markets de-risk, Canadian markets do not remain untouched. And when the U.S. economy contracts into an oil-driven inflation environment, the pressure on Canada is worse because Canada enters the cycle with a more indebted household sector and a more fragile housing structure. That is the real crisis. Canada is not arriving at this possible recession from a position of strength. The Bank of Canada is already holding rates while growth weakens and unemployment rises. The household is already overleveraged. Mortgage renewals are already rolling in. Youth unemployment is already elevated. Per capita pain is already visible. So if the American economy crosses from slowdown into recession while oil remains elevated, the Canadian household gets hit from three directions at once. Income risk from weaker labor, cost pressure from energy and food, debt service pressure from renewals, and a central bank that cannot simply slash rates without importing more inflation through the currency and the fuel channel. That is why a model in Washington matters at a kitchen table in Brampton. The line is American. The bill is Canadian. And unlike the United States, Canada does not even get the comfort of being the reserve currency issuer inside the storm. It drains the household from both sides, importing the weakness and importing the price pressure, while pretending it has a clean, independent response available. It does not. The American recession line is rising, while Canada is already walking into renewal shock and wage weakness. The two systems are chained together. One data update south of the border becomes a household problem north of it. That is not abstract macro. That is a delayed invoice. America prints the signal. Canada receives the invoice.
The cascade.
If the line crosses 50 and the recession pattern holds, the sequence is not mysterious. Markets fall first. Not all at once, not evenly, but enough to hit confidence and funding conditions. Equities repriced before layoffs become front-page truth because markets discount the next stage of weakness before households fully feel it. Hiring freezes second. That is how labor pain enters the system quietly. Firms stop expanding before they start cutting. Young workers and job switchers feel it first, then contractors, then marginal full-time roles. The labor market looks stable on paper, even while the actual opportunity set is shrinking in real time. Consumer spending weakens third. That is the engine room. Households do not need to panic for spending to contract. They just need to get cautious. One fewer dinner out, one delayed appliance purchase, one canceled trip, one decision to hold cash instead of spending it. Across millions of households, that caution becomes output weakness. Credit.
Like, consumer confidence is so important. They'll start restricting what they buy. It's the, as you say, explains, the cascade across the whole economy of things tightening.
Tightens fourth. Banks get selective. Refinancing gets harder. Small businesses face tougher terms. Households needing flexibility find less of it available. In Canada, this matters more because credit tightening lands on a population already facing mortgage rollover. The household does not only meet a weaker economy, it meets a weaker economy while its largest monthly liability is being repriced. Then the depletion of fiscal room accelerates, tax revenue softens, deficit pressure rises, political promises get thinner. Rescue becomes more expensive or less willing to finance fantasy at the old price. That is the cascade. And the crucial point is this. The recession does not begin when television declares it. It begins when the sequence starts. By the time the official label arrives, hiring has already slowed, spending has already weakened.
Yeah, by the time they say it's a recession, you've been in a recession.
And households have already started cutting back. That is what makes the 49 so important. It is not a verdict on the future. It is evidence that the sequence may already be underway. The recession starts in behavior before it appears in headlines. Close the folder. There's a line. It sits at 49. It has never crossed 50 without a recession following inside the next 12 months.
I still don't know what the 49 is. We're almost at the end. Is he not going to
That
explain?
reading was taken before the full damage of the oil shock, the confidence collapse, and the newer labor softness had fully entered the model. The next update will see a weaker world than the last one did. And that matters, because the line does not exist in isolation. It sits beside weaker payrolls, weaker sentiment, slower growth, higher oil, falling markets. And central banks that, as we already showed in Owing to Canaan, the stagflation trap, are stuck between inflation they cannot ignore and weakness they cannot cleanly relieve. That is the real message. The model is not magic. It is a mirror. And right now, the mirror is showing an economy that looks increasingly like the economies that eroded before the public noticed. For Canadians, the meaning is even harsher. Because Canada enters this possible recession with less household room, more housing sensitivity, and more dependency on US demand than the public likes to admit. The model is reading American data. But in a branch plant economy tied to the same continental machine, American recession probability is also a measure of Canadian coming pain. That is why this number deserves attention. Not because one model should rule your life, because one model with an 80-year record is now sitting 1 point below its danger threshold while almost every major input around it is deteriorating. You do not need to worship the model, but you do need to understand what it is saying. It is saying the
So it's American recession probability.
system is near the line.
That's the
It is
number.
saying the buffers are thin. It is saying the next shock does not need to be enormous if the body is already this fragile. And for a generation trained to believe the rescue always comes, that is the most dangerous part of the file. The rescue is no longer guaranteed. The line is getting closer, and belief is running into arithmetic again. The line is not the crisis. The line tells you the crisis is close enough to smell. Drop A like so more households see this before the next data update. Subscribe for the economic truths nobody else will say out loud. Tell me in the comments. Are you making decisions right now like a recession is coming? Or are you still betting the system finds a way out? I am Hoch, and I will see you in the next one.
Okay. So first of all, I want to look up that number. American recession probability number. It's taking a long time to think. Likely term recession probability. That I don't know what I'm seeking. I don't think he told me the exact definition. Okay, the current consensus probability of a U.S. recession in the next 12 months, with some prominent models approaching a coin flip level around 49%. This is elevated compared to the typical background risk, not the base case. So with some prominent models. Latest estimates from major sources. Moody's Analytics, 49%. Highest profile figure, one tick below the historical 50 warning threshold that precedes every U.S. recession in the past 80. So this is what he's talking about. Moody's Analytics. It has risen sharply due to the oil shock. Goldman Sachs puts it 30, JP Morgan 35, 40, 27 to 32. Okay. Recession risk is meaningful but far from certain. Most forecasters still expect the U.S. to muddle through with slower but positive growth, aided by eventual rate cuts later in 2026. Okay, so not guaranteed, but the thing is, my opinion, when the economy weakens, you start to see people towards extreme. And I think we see this in politics right now. People are moving out towards the extremes. And I think this is largely because of a weakening economy. And if the economy continues to weaken, the chances of seeing a recession, like up to like 49%, that's a pretty high chance of a recession. Thing is, like, recessions happen throughout all of history. How you get out of the recession is what matters, and usually it leads to like a more dramatic shift in like politics, which we might see. I think you can see this thing happening right now in the UK. their more extreme right wing and their more extreme left wing parties are currently more popular than the traditional parties, or more middle. Um, I mean, in the end, they one of the hopefully one of those parties as a way to get out of the recession. We've been there before. Be there again. If I remember correctly, usually you have to raise taxes on the rich. Wasn't that how we got out of the Great Recession? I mean, that and a war, hopefully. Ugh, is that why he's starting a war? Sucks. Well, I mean, nothing's certain yet. If it if we go into a recession, then we'll look up ways to get out of the recession and push for that in politics. Usually the economy goes through ups and downs, so I mean we'll just have to see. Let's have a look at what people are saying in the comments. You start once again, I'm no economist, but I have been totally unaware. But I have been totally unaware of this indicator. What I am aware of is recession after recession going back to the mid 70s. I also remember being very hungry in the early 80s. There was no government help, no helicopter money, no anything except family, community, etc. What is coming is going to be brutal for those that never knew or have forgotten. So clearly an older watcher. Please talk about the 90 billion train disaster planned that will likely never happen but will make Carney's friends richer. Okay, I'm just doing video recommendations. The Canadian government's response is here, have some food stamps. Called something else, but yes, food stamp. Middle class is consuming food stamps now. Socialism is sinking us all into a deep broke hell. I mean, like that's a doomer take. I think we can figure out a way out of it. Dude, we've been in a recession for a long time. We're just about in a depression a couple years ago. Standards for that are that's replies. I can click down. Printing a few more trains of currency. At least Canadian media is honest about what is happening, so potentially be materially and psychologically prepared. Like, I think our media here is more honest than in the US. I don't think they're that honest. Like, I haven't seen anyone talking about, oh yeah, recession's coming. Be prepared. It's over. Canada's just doing what it's destined for. If Carney had any intentions of looking like he wanted to fix anything, have immediately dropped intra-provincial trade barriers. Wouldn't have saved the situation, but it would have gave an indication, some sort of effort. From what I understand, they're pushing to get intra-trade barriers removed. Um, Canada is not the only one in trouble, but we are in a situation that would take a miracle to turn around. It is literally possible, way worse than anyone thinks. I'm going to be honest. I think Canada has a lot going for it. Like, I think, I personally think Carney is moving in a lot of the correct directions. Um, he's trying to remove trade barriers. He's investing more into oil and gas and electricity. I don't like the big deficit spending. That concerns me. Hate deficit spending. Um, and I'm not an economist. Maybe the things he's getting out of it are worth it. I just, as soon as you're over the 70% to GDP ratio, basically have to stop deficit spending, because deficit spending beyond that starts to severely restrict your economy. And I don't see a solution for that in the short term. But like, we're a massive country. We have huge amounts of natural resources, largely a well-educated population. I think we're a couple good laws away from like a boom in our economy. It would only take a couple change in laws, some removing of regulations and restrictions, leaning a bit more into the free market, and I think we could turn it all around. And like, that's what I'll try and do with my vote. Vote for the person who I think will turn the country around. Till then, I'll just talk about it.